everyone, welcome to Eerie Earfuls, spending the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch! Each episode we choose a horror movie double feature to compare and contrast for your entertainment. Fair warning, there will be spoilers. I'm Justin.
And I'm Brandon. Okay, let's get to today's double feature. The person picking the double feature rotates from episode to episode. This week was my pick, and I chose The Birds and Maximum Overdrive. Let's pop in the synopsis tape.
The Birds is a 1963 horror thriller directed by Alfred Hitchcock and written by Ed McBain based on the short story by Daphne du Maurier. At a San Francisco pet store, socialite Melanie Daniels meets lawyer Mitch Brenner, who is looking to buy lovebirds for his sister Kathy's 11th birthday. Mitch pretends to mistake Melanie for a shop employee after revealing he recognizes her from court, where she appeared after a prank of hers resulted in property damage. After a tense exchange, Melanie buys the lovebirds and travels to Bodega Bay, where Mitch is staying on his family's farm for the weekend. Melanie rents a boat and crosses the bay to secretly leave the lovebirds at the Brenner farm. Mitch spots her during her retreat and meets her at the dock back in town, but as Melanie approaches the wharf, a gull attacks her. Mitch tends to her head wound inside the cafe where Mitch's mother Lydia arrives, having seen Mitch's car outside. Rather than driving back, Melanie stays with Annie, the local teacher. That night, they hear a violent thud at the front door and find a dead gull at the threshold. The next day at Kathy's birthday party, a swarm of gulls suddenly attack, sending all of the children fleeing inside. The following evening, another freak bird attack occurs during dinner, with sparrows swarming into the house through the chimney. In the aftermath, Mitch insists Melanie stay the night. The next morning, Lydia discovers her neighbor has been killed by birds and had his eyes pecked out. Melanie volunteers to fetch Kathy from school, but a murder of crows settles on the playground jungle gym, seemingly waiting for their moment to strike. Melanie warns Annie, and they work together to evacuate the children, but can't save them from the sudden crow attack which injures many children as they flee towards their homes. Melanie and Kathy are separated, with Kathy taking shelter in Annie's house. Meanwhile, back in town, gulls attack a gas station, causing a car crash that results in an explosion. Melanie runs to Annie's house to fetch Kathy, only to find Annie was killed by birds while trying to protect Kathy. The Brenners and Melanie barricade themselves in their house, which is assailed by wave after wave of birds that begin pecking their way through the walls and doors. During a lull in attacks, Melanie investigates fluttering in the attic and becomes trapped as waves of birds attack her until she falls catatonic. Mitch saves her and insists they all drive to San Francisco to get Melanie to a hospital. When Mitch goes for the car, he discovers an army of birds has quietly gathered, but none of them attack. The radio reports simultaneous bird attacks also happening in nearby communities, prompting possible military intervention. The film ends with the Brenners and Melanie slowly driving away in their car as thousands of birds watch ominously.
Maximum Overdrive is a 1986 horror comedy written and directed by Stephen King and based on one of his short stories. As Earth crosses into the trail of a comet, previously inanimate machines suddenly spring to life. Chaos ensues as digital signs project insults, bridges raise on their own, soda machines begin firing cans like projectiles, and everything electronic begins violently attacking and killing humans. At the Dixie Boy truck stop just outside Wilmington, North Carolina, an employee is blinded after a gas pump sprays diesel in his eyes. Then, a waitress is injured by an electric knife, and arcade machines in the back room electrocute a customer. Bill Robinson, the Dixie Boy cook, begins to suspect something is wrong. The blinded employee is soon run down by a red garbage truck, and a big rig sporting a giant Green Goblin decal runs over a Bible salesman, knocking him into a ditch. More big rigs arrive and begin circling the truck stop, trapping everyone inside. A newlywed couple, Connie and Kurt, are chased down the highway by a speeding Mack truck. They manage to shake the big rig and soon arrive at the Dixie Boy. Kurt tries to slip through a gap between the circling trucks, but their car is hit and flips upside down. Bill and another customer rush to help, but the trucks attack. They're saved by Dixie Boy owner Bubba Hendershot, who uses a rocket launcher to destroy several of the trucks. The next morning, a bulldozer and a military platform vehicle with a mounted machine gun arrive. Bubba uses another rocket to blow up the bulldozer, but is gunned down, along with several others inside the Dixie Boy. The platform vehicle then demands via Morse code that the human refuel the trucks in exchange for their lives. While pumping, Bill theorizes that the comet is actually a broom operated by interstellar aliens that are using Earth's machines to destroy humanity so the aliens can repopulate the Earth. Later, he sneaks a grenade onto the platform vehicle, destroying it, then leads everyone out of the diner via a sewer hatch to the main road just as the trucks demolish the Dixie Boy. The Green Goblin truck chases them to the docks, killing one of them before Bill destroys the truck with the rocket launcher. The survivors then sail off to safety. The film ends with a title card explaining that 2 days later, a UFO was destroyed by a Soviet quote-unquote weather satellite, conveniently equipped with Class 4 nuclear missiles and a laser cannon. 6 days later, the Earth passes out of the comet's tail and the survivors are still alive.
Okay, why did you pick these two movies?
I picked these two movies because, when I saw them, I immediately, especially when I saw Maximum Overdrive and I thought about it, I was like, oh, it's just the birds, but with trucks. And it turns out that I was correct, because when I was watching the special features on Maximum Overdrive, they were interviewing, I think it was a production assistant, and he talked about at one point how he was talking to Stephen King, and at one point he basically just said, I'm trying to make the birds, but with trucks. And I feel like that was perfect validation. But also, both of these stories, the more you dig into it, both of these stories revolve around life being disrupted by forces that were once seen as benign. In the birds, it's obviously birds. And in Maximum Overdrive, it's all of machine electronics, except for some of them.
Kind of, sometimes.
Yeah. Especially when it's convenient for the film. It is. Yeah.
Yep.
Both stories also involve challenging complacency. God damn it! Stop jumping on the floor! Stop it! Both stories involve challenging complacency, and they also show us how fragile our happiness is. Like, just now when my dog jumped down and shook everything, and I had to yell at her again. Isn't that right? Look at that! You see, Justin? Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up that someone on the special features said that Stephen King was basically trying to make the birds but with trucks, because when I talked to Stephanie, when I told her the pairing, she was like, why? And then once Maximum Overdrive started, she was like, oh, this is the birds but with trucks. And I was like, yep.
Much. It's amazing. I would tend to agree with Stephanie that they are basically the same, except that The Birds is, filmed and is paced very well. And Maximum Overdrive is filmed and paced like someone who has removed their nose and just replaced it with a brick of cocaine.
Apt. So I know that I'm pretty sure, if I remember the dates correctly, this movie was made around the same time he would have been writing Cujo, and he already said that he could not remember writing Cujo. He was so high on cocaine at that point that whenever he picks that novel up and looks through it, he said it feels like it's written by a stranger. He said, it's too bad. I like it. I just don't remember writing it. And you can kind of get that sensibility from the movie, because it starts. Someone plants their foot on the gas and it just rips the whole movie. Mm-hmm. It's full throttle all the way through until, the midpoint when someone abruptly slams on the brakes so that we can very briefly have two characters have had sex, but not have sex. Just laying in the afterglow with the most lazy, romance.
Yep.
It was the most generic bass and drum beat.
Yeah? Am I?
Not that cute.
Well, maybe I'll grow on you.
Okay. And that was done by AC/DC, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I actually don't know.
I know that they provided the music, but I wasn't sure if they provided the actual scoring as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think some of the scoring was just wordless tracks that they had written. I think I wanna say, I could be wrong, because the soundtrack, is Who Made Who. That's the official soundtrack. But I don't think any of the incidental music is on that soundtrack, so I couldn't tell you 100% sure.
Was that basically just the greatest hits?
No, there was a couple of original songs on there.
Oh,
some of them were some of their older songs with Bon Scott. But yeah, you're right. The Birds, the difference between the two films, The Birds has a really interesting pacing. It makes it interesting to watch, the flow, and it helps set up this blockbuster formula that you can see, you know, in Jaws, in like all these other big blockbuster films that come later, like Star Wars and, you know, things like that. There is an ebb and flow to the story because everything needs an ebb and flow. You need contrast. It's the same thing in, you know, music. You need slow parts to emphasize the fast parts. I actually I mistook my exhaustion for boredom. Because in the middle, when they're doing that weird, you know, post-sex scene thing, where they basically explain the entire plot of the movie and figure it all out while they're naked and sweaty. I was mistaken. I thought, you know, I was bored, but really I was just exhausted because up until that point, there is no slow point. It's just like constant gah. So when you get to that point, you're like, fuck, I could, like, I don't know, take a 30-minute poop or something. Like, I need a break.
You know, it's a little funny. So we are like, we might as well just like hang a hat on it and say that like we're re-recording this because we recorded this episode once and
we did.
We had mic issues. The wrong mic was picking up audio, and so it's some of this. We're trying to approach the conversation a little differently than we did last time, just so that it doesn't feel like we're repeating the same things. Just to be like, all right, and now we will read our script and prepare it and release it, but this time with the good audio. But it's funny that you're. I really like Maximum Overdrive. I recognize it's not a good movie because it's very stupid, but it's the right kind of stupid that. There's like a joy in it, just an unhinged joy of just like, fuck it. Like, you can tell King's entire attitude on set is basically like, I don't know, this, fuck it, let's do it. And that really comes across in the movie with the pacing, but also just like with literally as sequences happen and as like you could, I think you took the same approach to the script because you mentioned when you were talking about like machines come to life, sort of. Sometimes when it's convenient for the plot. that's true because I remember watching it and like, you know, the first thing that we see is those bank marquee signs. It was just scrolling fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. And that was King's cameo in the movie. Also a very Hitchcock move, like just slipping himself into his movie. But he like walks up to an ATM and it just starts saying like, you were an asshole, you're an asshole, you're an asshole. And he's like, honey, come over here. This machine just called me an asshole.
Well, what he says is sugar buns. Come on over here, sugar buns. This ATM just called me an asshole.
That's right. And like the ATMs turn against them, and like the bridges like turn on and start to raise on their own, and soda machines are like launching cans and like kill a little league coach. But like also everyone that arrives at the gas station at the Dixie Boy, they drove cars there, and the cars seem fine. Like there's a guy in the back room that gets somehow hypnotized for whatever reason and gets
those
electrocuted.
Colors and shapes, which were like never brought up again.
Yeah,
you remember when all those arcade machines just started showing the colors and shapes, and it kind of hypnotized him, and then he got electrocuted by touching a wooden pinball cabinet. Wooden and glass, people.
Yep.
Science is not hard. That's all I'm saying.
Look, everyone knows that the best conductor for electricity is wood. That's why all those trees stand up so well to being struck by lightning.
Yes.
But like, all that stuff happens, but then like Kurt and Connie drive completely fine to the Dixie Boy without any issues. They're chased by like 3 different types of trucks, like in their journey, because they're chased by like a tow truck and then by like one of those big diesels. And later, the trucks that are circling when they start circling the gas station seem to like run into the car, almost like "fuck you, little car." Like they're mad at the car, but that doesn't make sense why that car doesn't come to life, but like the ice cream truck does, and is driving around. What was it playing? Shit, it's been too long since I've watched it now. Oh, it was King of the Road. It was some, like, hilariously ironic song. While we're talking about the nonsense of Maximum Overdrive. I don't know that I can say anything in this movie bugs me with the exception of like 2 decisions that they've made later in the movie. But it feels a little weird that they set up the ice cream truck to be kind of like this very sinister presence. Because when, what's the kid's name? I can't remember. Billy? Joey?
Sure. I don't think
Declan,
it really matters. As
Duncan.
long as it's a face on a bike. King was like, just put him on the camera, you know.
Whatever. The kid, the son of the gas station worker that got gas in his eyes, when that kid is at the Little League game and then he like rides away on his bike and he sees like a lawnmower chasing people and that like a Walkman had like electrocuted people, and but like they set up the ice cream truck as this like sinister presence because you can hear the song coming way before the truck gets there, and he hides, and the truck like drives through the frame, turns the corner, and drives away, and you feel like you get the impression that like he just avoided some terrible situation. And then the truck is never seen again until the very end of the movie. And it's there for like 30 seconds. Like it's one of the last trucks they shoot.
Is it the one that the little boy shoots?
Yeah.
I think they only brought it back just for that arc.
Yeah, but like, but why? Like, you need a middle point. For stories to have an arc, you have to have an arc. It has to start low, like build high, then go low.
Oversimplifying it. As long as there's an introduction and a resolution, the middle is all just filmy.
Like, well, so like, there's a thing that they do with like subtle plot points in movies called planting, where if they want to explore a particular theme, they'll do something, they'll have something that reflects that theme happen that looks incidental, but they'll carry it almost like a running joke throughout the movie. And like, Mad Max Fury Road is a great example because early in the movie, Max has a shoe stolen. He like, someone pulls up his boot off of his foot when he's in the middle of fighting the war boys. There was this build-up and payoff. There was like the initial moment of his shoe being stolen, and then a moment where like he like steals Nicholas Holt's shoe, and then later he gives Nicholas Holt a shoe, and that completes that arc. And it's just a little incidental thing, but it sort of reflects the arc of the movie and the way that Max comes to respect Nicholas Holt's character. And there's none of that in this. It's just like, it's a good thing he didn't get caught by that ice cream truck. If that had been the truck that like killed his dad, like that would have made sense. It would have made an arc, like a thematic end to that, because he would have been like, my name is Inigo Montoya, you run over my father, prepare to be sent to the shop.
Bazooka. Yep.
But that
yeah,
doesn't
I'm
happen.
surprised that they went with the ice cream truck and not the steamroller, because the steamroller killed like a lot of his, friends, I guess, if they're friends.
Gruesomely.
Yes. Well, I mean, it would have been worse had, Stephen King had it his way, because I believe they set up that shot and filmed it like 3 different times. And the one that ended up in the movie is obviously the least gruesome one, where that kid gets run over. But they'd filmed it like 2 or 3 times. The one time it was like a dummy, and I don't remember what they did, but when they rolled over it, the head popped, and like the top of the head exploded, and this like foam cushion stuff came out. But they said when they looked at it on film, it was one of the most disturbing things they'd ever seen, because it looked like the brain had actually like popped and squished out. And so then they did it again, and they basically just filled this mannequin with fake blood, and they were like, okay, now we're going to roll it over. And they did, and it just gushed everywhere. It gets all over the steamroller, it gets all over the grass, and then they're like, we should probably film a version of this that does not have anything. And then they had to clean all of that up and refilm it again. And that happens so many times in the movie. Like, there were so many shots. There was a shot that they filmed after that guy gets hit in the head with a can, where like that spot, and some of this stuff was completely unintentional. It just happened and it worked, and it happened to be really gross. That spot ended up getting like an air bubble underneath it. Mm-hmm. And so before like the blood came out of it, it swelled up like really big and started like spurting blood. And yeah, and they were like, oh my God, it's amazing. It was completely unintentional. It wasn't designed to do that, but it did. And it worked. And of course it never made it in the movie, because that was too much. One of my favorite ones that did make it in the movie was when, I guess it's that guy that got diesel in his eyes, gets hit by the truck, and
blood just goes everywhere. It's amazing. And it's because they basically just stuck a mannequin over there with his same clothes on. And underneath, they just had like sandwich bags full of fake blood pin-cushioned underneath so that when it gets hit by the truck, it just explodes everywhere. It's amazing. That actually did make it in the movie. It's glorious.
See, it's too bad that they cut some of that stuff because, like, you mentioned the coach getting hit with the cans, and that specifically is a scene that, like, when he gets hit in the movie, in the shot that's in the movie, it hits him in the head. It looks like it hurts. But then later, when they cut to him laying on the ground, he has this, like, can-sized hole in his head where it looks like it, like a missile shot him in the head. And that's not what we see before he falls. So it's like, when did that happen? He got hit in the head, and then he fell. Or no, he got hit in the balls, and then he, like, crouched, and then he got hit in the head, and he got knocked out. But, like, when you see him, like, so gruesomely dead, you're like, did he get hit again? Was the hole just slow to form? It's not like a bruise. It was like a hole.
It definitely was a little slow to form. There's still, like, they had some, like, still shots. Somebody's got to have this footage somewhere because they would show, like, still shots in the special features of some of those effects, especially the head one. And I was like, okay, so we have the still shots, so the film is somewhere. I just don't know where it is and how to incorporate it into the movie.
It's a little funny that you were like, oh, this movie, it goes too fast. It doesn't slow down. It's just cheesy nonsense.
Well, it's not that it just goes too fast. It's just always fast. I don't mind fast as long as there's some slow mixed in, you know?
Sure.
But if it's just all blur, it just gets boring.
It was just your same reaction to Shocker. And so, like, and they feel very much of the same DNA.
They do. There were just more reasons that I did not like Shocker. For one, you know, Stephen King has taste. So when he, you know, was like, I want a really awesome soundtrack, why don't I get AC/DC? He actually got AC/DC to do the soundtrack. Wes Craven was like, I need a band to do a cool Shocker theme, but I don't have that much money. What if I just get knockoff Poison to do it, and it'll be great? And it's not. The song is not memorable. There's just... Shocker! There's just no... Ugh.
That's all I can remember of it.
Yeah, that's all I can remember either.
Anyway, I don't want to relitigate Shocker. It just was, they felt very much of their time, very 80s, very like dumb, like hair metal rock.
Yeah, see, that's something that's really interesting. So the music that's in Maximum Overdrive actually, you know, pretty much dates the movie other than all the electronics that are in the movie, which are horribly outdated. But also the music very much cements when it was made, mid-80s, like prime classic rock era, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Birds, in that way, is almost sort of timeless. Other than, you know, some of like the Cars and stuff, The Birds is way more timeless because, number one, the thing that is, you know, attacking everybody is something that we still have around today. I mean, we still have semi-trucks, but birds largely have not evolved much since 1960 whatever. So they're still the same. Some of them are still alive since 1960 whatever.
Look, we all know birds aren't real, and bird technology has come a long way. Thank you, government. That is my favorite stupid conspiracy theory, that birds aren't real. I love it so much. It is amazingly dumb.
But I think one of the things that kind of makes The Birds timeless is not only the subject matter, but also, I think, the soundtrack, because rather than using really any instrumentation, it's all just birds. It's really interesting to me, because as a music person, because the Birds soundtrack is, you know, we would normally kind of classify that as like music concrete, where you're taking a bunch of random sounds, putting them together and creating kind of a quote unquote sonic sculpture, which we've talked about before with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The first one employs that same effect. And I think, you know, some of those movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and others were inspired by this soundtrack to this film, because it is just so much. It's just bird noises. It makes it sound so much less menacing than it is. Because, when you think of bird noises, I don't know, you think of birds being like, want a cracker, or whatever, but it's like... Scary sounds, a lot of fluttering and flapping. They used, one of the inspirations was called a tritonium, I believe is what it's called, tritonium, which was, it's actually a German instrument that's, it was designed like instead of a, keyboard, it was kind of like one of the first, electronic musical instruments that was ever invented. And it's kind of like the precursor to a soundboard almost, because you could record bits of sound and then play it back, and you can adjust the pitch of those sounds, which is what they did for the birds. They just recorded a shit ton of bird sounds, and then they were like, we have to piece them together in such a way, and they, can adjust the reverb and the pitch and every little tiny thing you could think of to, eventually create kind of a sonic sculpture for birds. And that's really interesting to think about, that there's no other music throughout the entire movie, the entire soundtrack with all the bird attacks. It's all just like those bird noises that they've manufactured. At the beginning, it's birds. At the end, it's bird noises. Mm-hmm. The only song is that little folk song that they're singing, which is, I can't fucking remember the name of that song. It's so annoying.
It went on for like 10 minutes. It was so long.
So that was the thing was they had the song ready because it was public domain. So they were like, just make the kids sing the song. And it was not nearly long enough for that scene, because that scene that you hear it is the scene where what is her name? It's not Marnie. That's a
Melanie.
Different fucking movie. God damn it. Melanie, yes. It's not Marnie, because that movie's Marnie. Anyway, so Melanie, she's going over to the bench and she's going to go smoke a cigarette, and she's waiting on the kids to be done so that she can go in and whatever she's doing. Anyway, and you see one crow fly over, and then you see another, it's very... really well done scene, because you have this folk song that's being sung by the kids, and it's very repetitive, and it just kind of lulls you into like this false sense of security. You're hearing it repeated over and over again, and it's allowing you to have your focus pulled away from the birds, even though you do notice them every once in a while. So it's kind of creating the scene from Melanie's point of view, where you are, distracted and not really noticing until, the entire jungle gym is covered with birds. And then you're like, fuck, I have to get inside the schoolhouse and warn the children.
That's a really good scene. Anyway, just because the way it builds, the pacing of that specific scene is so good, with the way that, the bird, it's not just that the birds are slowly gathering, it's the way they shoot it and the way they make that soundscape. It feels like the birds are waiting, like they know there are kids inside and they're just waiting for an opportunity, which you don't really get with the rest of it much, because it feels more like just sort of a weird random bursts of aggression. But this one in particular, there's a lot of build up to it, and it almost feels like they're like a hive mind waiting. It's so good.
Yeah, and, that guy. So the guy that was on set, they basically got the okay to do the public domain song. They had the kids do it, and Alfred Hitchcock was like, I need more song to cover this scene, because he was one of those crazy people where he knew, how he could, in his head, kind of configure, how much footage of actual film there was, how that translates into time, for 32 frames per second or whatever it is, 24 frames per second, whatever the standard is for studio films. And he had all of that timed out. So he was like, I need this, much more music. And so that guy just went back and, wrote verse after verse after verse after verse. And he was like, I had so much music for him. And I was like, here, just have them, just new verses over and over and over. And And that's what's in the final version of the film because, they eventually ran out of public domain verses. So they were like, just fucking sing this guy's verses. And that guy still gets royalty checks when they play the movie like on TCM or whatever because his verses are featured in the film. So
that's amazing. Yeah. I love the way the Birds never explains itself. Like I said, the crow scene in particular outside of the school, it feels like the Birds are waiting for those kids. And then when the kids finally make their escape, the Birds are like, all right, boys, get to it. But like, I like how at the end, like the ending is so tense of Mitch just walking to the car and pulling it up. And there's, hundreds of birds just sitting and watching him. And the movie ends with them just getting in the car and driving away. They just drive down the road. The birds don't attack. And we're just left literally with like a, why? ¿Por qué? Mm-hmm. And I love that. It's just creepy. It's one of those things where, like, we know if nature were like, fuck you humans, you're gone, like, we wouldn't have a chance because they way outnumber us, which that lady in the cafe even brings up, the one who's like, there's like 74 billion birds in the world. You're telling me that they're all coordinating? It's ridiculous. Meanwhile, Maximum Overdrive is like, no, here's a thesis explanation of exactly what happened. We're going to tell you what happens at the very beginning. The Earth is in the tail of a comet. Machines are coming to life. Then we're going to have the characters guess that that's why, go further and somehow intuit, oh, if we're in the tail of a comet, that must mean that we're under the influence of an alien ship who's coming down to civilization to clear us out using our own machines against us so that then they can settle on this Earth in our place. I mean, just logically, that's where the mind goes. And then at the end, bring up another title card to confirm, yes, in fact, those two characters in the afterglow of sex somehow reached the heightened mind state to intuit this intergalactic being's plan because the Russians shot it out of the sky.
That checks out.
I also love the very 80s Cold War reference of a Russian, quote, weather satellite with class 4 nuclear missiles shot it out of the sky. Like, oh, the 80s.
That's actually, one of the things that makes, I think, in my opinion, the Birds more timeless than Maximum Overdrive is the fact that they don't ever explain it. And they talk about how it's a thing that kind of grows, from Bodega Bay out to San Francisco to other parts of California, blah, blah, blah. I don't think they really established that in Maximum Overdrive. I'm not really sure if it's clear this is happening outside of Wilmington, North Carolina. I mean, obviously they show a wide shot of the entire planet, so you assume, but nothing outside of that takes place outside of Wilmington, North Carolina. And you don't get like radio reports of like Los Angeles and New York are both in smoke today because whatever.
You kind of do, because there's very briefly, right at the beginning of the movie, there's a radio report when Brett is riding in the car with the Bible salesman, where they're explaining that like there are reports of machines sort of turning against their owners.
Right, but that's the local Wilmington station.
Are you sure? Because I don't think they really identify themselves. It's just on the radio, and then the Bible salesman was like, I'm going to turn that off. But I'm greasy and gross.
Just, taking a guess because of how radios work. It's probably a radio station close by. Otherwise, they wouldn't, especially in the 80s, because they wouldn't have been able to pick it up from where they were,
Right.
It was not nearly as common.
Well, there's nationally syndicated news programs that they would, broadcast to local radio stations. Like, NPR doesn't only do local stories all day. We also get Steve Inskeep. Like, it's not like he comes down to Northwest Arkansas like, hey guys, Steve Inskeep here. I'm here to record at whatever our station is, KNWA.
I just meant, a lot of times when they do those, I mean, I could be wrong.
And I think the radios go out too. Like, I mean, I know that
they do.
The city that the place with the bridge that Stephen King is at the beginning of the movie is definitely a different place than the Dixie Boy. The Dixie Boy may be just outside of that city, but I'm just saying that it's not like only that small gas station. Like, it's definitely...
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking, that in the Birds, they don't really explain it, and they kind of, insinuate that it's becoming a national phenomenon. In the Maximum Overdrive, they over-explain it, and then they...
I mean, you're right. They don't really get across sort of an apocalyptic tone, really. I mean, they kind of do, sort of, like, because there's all those trucks that show up that, like, line up to get fueled. So, like, there's the implication that this is, like, a very large problem that's affecting the whole world, but you don't really get a sense of the scope. It's a very localized story. We only care about these specific people, and they have a fucking easy time of it. Like, nothing really goes that wrong for them. There's, like, the one moment when Bubba goes out and shoots, blows up a truck, or the Hummer? Maybe? Something like that. It was some truck that he blew up, and then the military platform vehicle shoots him and a bunch of people inside. But that's, like, the lowest point of the movie, and that's not that low. Like, they go through worse in Tremors than they do in Maximum Overdrive. They've got military weapons, and they're like, well, we've got these weapons. I guess we'll leave. Bye.
Right?
They get on a boat. They sail away. Nothing, like, they have no further issues. And the movie even ends with being like, and the survivors are still survivors.
Yep. Well, I should say, it's the survivors are still survivors. And then you hear, Curtis, I get seasick. And then it's the credits.
That is one of my criticisms. That's Lisa Simpson.
Yes.
Playing the most... I know that this was direction that she chose, I believe. Like, she was like... She came up with how she wanted to play her character. And I'm sure that a lot of that stuff that she said was like sort of ad-libbed. Like, she was just sort of riffing things off the top of her head. But the shrew character is one of those characters that when it shows up, especially when it's something like written and directed by men, where I'm like, oh, King, what are you doing?
That's true. However, it's not... I wouldn't say, I could be wrong. It's been, forever since I read, like, The Taming of the Shrew or anything. But Yardley Smith is, she's really charismatic. And even though technically her role in the film is, quote-unquote, nagging wife, for me, there's only, like, a couple of moments where it comes off as slightly annoying, and the rest of the time it is comic gold. It is probably the strongest performance in the entire film.
Easily.
It's the glue that basically holds the film together, because I'm afraid if she was not in that movie, there might not be a single likable character in the movie. Because otherwise, everybody else is either just like wallpaper paste or they're a cartoon villain. And she is the only like comic relief, thing that's adding some fun to the film. And so, yeah, I'll never, ever, ever apologize for liking that part. I don't think she will either, because she was talking about how, after they tested it for, test audiences, obviously, they were like, they reacted really strongly to your character. They thought she was going to be a huge deal. Later she did The Simpsons, so I guess she did become a huge deal. But they thought she was going to be like the next ingenue or whatever. And so they were setting her up to go on like The Tonight Show and all this other stuff. And then when the movie flopped, they basically rescinded all their invitations. They were like, no, we don't actually need you on The Tonight Show anymore.
That's so sad.
I know, right?
I cannot believe. I mean, you're right. There are not many There's one other performance in that movie that is brilliant, and it is a brief, shining, very short performance, and that is whatever the name of that fucking character is that gets shot after he like slams the doors open and says something to the effect of, "The fuck's going on here?" And then he immediately gets gunned down by the platform gun. And like that guy, when he went down, I was like, there goes the best character in the movie. I love that guy. And then everyone else is just like there, like Brett and what is Emilio Estevez's character? I cannot remember.
I don't know. He's the coach from the Mighty Ducks, right?
Yeah,
it's a crossover film, right?
Yeah, this was This was early in the coach's life.
Later, he gets his life together, becomes an inspiring hockey coach, and coaches them all the way to the championship. Something like that. I remember that.
But yeah, like, Bubba Hendershot is a cartoon villain, but he's an enjoyable cartoon villain. Like, he plays that slimy Southern douchebag.
Also,
one
of the few that has the accent down really well. Mm-hmm. That specific, it's like North Carolina, Georgia, that region that has this weird.
There's like a syrupy quality to it.
Yeah, it is very. It's very saccharine, but it's also like kind of almost English too, like Scarlett O'Hara, like, you see that over there, boy, you know, like, it's very, like, there are actually people who still talk like that, surprisingly. Mm-hmm. I do think from a general perspective that the Southern accent has kind of mellowed a bit, and some of them have retained, some of their individuality, and some of them have kind of bled together, and I do think that kind of older style of accent is kind of diminishing.
Mm-hmm. I'm so sad by the way accents are being flattened. It's not just in the South, it's all of them. Although, aside, do you notice that anytime you want to portray someone as like less intelligent, you give them an accent? Not just Southern. Like, it's really common to think like, oh, we need a racist, so we're gonna be have them have that Southern accent and be like, listen here, I'm hateful, and we'll say cartoonishly bad things. But like, it's the same thing if you give someone like a Brooklyn accent or like a Jersey accent.
I'm a bad guy from Boston.
Yeah. All you have to do is have someone be talking like they live from they're from the Northeast or something, and immediately you're like, that person's a dummy.
Bad guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking bad guys.
So interesting. Not even necessarily bad, just like, I mean, because it's the same thing with Connie in Maximum Overdrive. Like, she has like a super thick Southern accent. Curtis, are you dead? And she's portrayed as like not a very smart character, like very, very dim and whiny.
Oh, sorry. The last thing. Sorry, I forgot to talk about the AC/DC because I'd mentioned the Byrds music.
Oh yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, the soundtrack to Maximum Overdrive is kind of the thing that really dates the film because it's all done by AC/DC. But surprisingly, the album, which is Who Made Who, is actually way more popular than the movie. And it was kind of a needed thing for AC/DC because, AC/DC was really popular after the release of Back in Black. They were gaining popularity with their old lead singer, Bon Scott. And then when he died in like 78, 79, I think, they decided that he wanted the band to go on without him. And so they found another lead singer, Brian Johnson. They went and recorded Back in Black. Not too long after that, it became a huge album, probably one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And then their reputation started taking quite a bit of a hit after that because they were so popular and because they do mention Satan a couple times in their lyrics, if I remember correctly.
I mean, the first song on Back in Black is Hell's Bells.
That's true.
You've got me ringing Hell's Bells.
Yeah.
And Bon Scott sang Highway to Hell, so, they came by that reputation, honestly.
Yeah. And a lot of people, like evangelists and stuff, started claiming that because of those references, because they exist in their music, that they're actually Satanists, and that there were also some serial killers around that time from the 80s and 70s that claimed to the local newspapers and stuff that they were inspired by AC/DC's lyrics, which just kind of dumped on top of that, coupled with crazy evangelist stuff. So AC/DC was having to do all this, PR work, basically saying, we're not Satanists, we're just anti-establishment, that kind of thing. And that's why they have those things in their lyrics. Anyway, so their albums were not selling great, their reputation was tarnished, and they weren't really big fans of having their music used in movies. Specifically, they wanted the option to like read the script and make sure that it was okay. I guess. And so, Stephen King, I think he had a pretty good relationship with them because one, he was a big fan, and two, he had already actually used one of their songs in a previous film of his, and I don't remember what it was. He didn't direct it, but it was like a movie based on his material, So they were already familiar, I guess, kind of with each other, getting the rights and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so when Stephen King sent them the script and they were like, this is amazing, we love it, it's everything we've ever wanted, because why would you not? If you're a hard rocker, anti-establishment, you're going to love Maximum Overdrive because it's all just everything exploding and people dying. It's just the best. And so they were like, it's great, we love it. And so they decided they didn't want to just re-release new or old material and just make their fans pay more for stuff that they already released. So there's some original material. The big song from the album is called Who Made Who. Direct reference to that lady, that crazy diner, the waitress lady. She runs outside and she's like, "We made you! We made you!" That's that's what it's in reference to. There's some other original songs, and there's also some older songs. And it actually, amazingly, for whatever reason, Who Made Who became a huge hit outside of the movie because the movie was not that big of a hit. And the album itself also sold really well. And so it kind of led to a renaissance for their music. I mean, it didn't get to the same level as Back in Black because I don't think any of their albums have ever reached that apex. But it did lead to like a renaissance of their music. And I think it leads into like For Those About to Rock and things like that, I think. Or maybe The Razor's Edge. I don't remember. Anyway, so it's really interesting how this movie, even though it could not save itself, managed to help save the career of AC/DC to a certain extent.
I want to circle back to something we were talking about earlier. We were talking about the weird way that there's no like logic to the machines coming to life, because some did, some didn't. It wasn't clear, like, for example, whether the power was like going out because the power itself was like sentient and being controlled, or if it was just like the trucks were somehow cutting the power. It was very unclear. Or
maybe the power plant is sentient.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows?
In the short story that it's based on, Trucks, the tone, first of all, obviously way different. It's a more serious story, and it's got a very grim tone to it. A lot of the characters in the movie are present in the story, sort of, or events that are, if you ask someone to start naming things that happened in the movie, most of the things that they probably would name in the movie also happen in the short story. Like the "We Made You" thing happens, but it's not a waitress that does it. If I remember correctly, there is a married couple. They're not named Connie and Kurt. I forgot what their actual names are. But, and it's the wife the proto Connie that starts shouting like, "We made them! We made you!" It's not hammy though. It's sort of like a panicked, desperate thing, because I don't remember exactly what happened. I think there's a salesman in the story as well. Not a Bible salesman specifically, I don't think, but a salesman of some kind. He's not slimy like he is in the movie. He's kind of barely a character. He's there long enough to he basically, as the trucks start to circle the truck stop, he tries to make a break for it, and one of the trucks runs him over, and that's when the newlywed wife character starts freaking out, saying, "We made them." There's also in the movie, whenever the Bible salesman starts like shouting, "Help me," from the ditch, that also happens in the story, but it's played very differently. They don't go to like try to rescue him. They hear it in the middle of the night. It's a story told in first person, and the main character hears it. And the wife hears it, and she starts to say something, and he sort of shushes her, and he's like, "So if you heard anything and you told other people about it, would your husband there be willing to overlook this, or do you think he'd go out there and try to help? And do you want him to do that? Do you think that's a good risk he should take?" And so she's like, "I don't hear anything," and she like goes back to bed, and the guy just continues to scream until he dies. There's also Bill is not a character in this, like the Emilio Estevez's character isn't in the story, sort of. That same type of like, generic protagonist role is there, but he's not, he doesn't work for the restaurant. There is a short order cook in the story, but he's just like a random background character. And the main character just sort of happened to pull into the truck stop about the same time whenever everything went down. And a key thing in the story, they don't mention any other electronics coming to life. It is specifically trucks that they're talking about that are coming to life. And at first, it's just the big rigs that are circling them. But eventually, a truck, like a pickup truck that's parked outside, seems to come to life and start to circle with the rest of the trucks. And that's a moment where the narrator has a sort of like, oh God, it's spreading kind of moment. Which again, is why it's so baffling that when King adapted his own story, because he wrote the script to this movie, there's no cars or trucks that come to life. The big trucks do.
There's some.
I can't think of a single car.
A weird little pickup truck thing that was at that gas station, it comes to life and tries to run that
the
guy
tow
over.
truck,
yeah.
I suppose.
And so,
Yeah. But still, that was like a key moment in the story when that truck comes to life, because they were like, oh, shit. And the story actually ends with like a very apocalyptic tone. The main character is like listening, and he hears a plane going by overhead, and the final sort of narration is roughly something to the effect of, I want to believe that there are people on the plane. I want to. And that's sort of how the story ends, is they're like, well, I guess we're slaves to the machines now. The end. Very different tone than the buck wild nonsense we got for the movie.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. And the same thing is true of The Birds to a certain extent, because the movie, takes place in Bodega Bay, which is an actual place in Northern California, just north of San Francisco. The short story and also the movie starts kind of slow because, you get the opening titles and she goes to like a bird shop and, there's birds in there, but it's very much focused on, the love story, the sexual tension between, what's her face?
Melanie.
Yes, Melanie, the main tension between Melanie and Mitch. And, the birds just kind of enter into the story periodically as like a little reminder, like, hey, we're also here, until, it eventually goes into like full attack mode and you no longer care about the romance anymore. Mm-hmm. It is not really like that in the short story, because it takes place, first of all, in the UK. It's in a Cornish seaside town, which is in Cornwall, which is like on the very bottom tip of the UK. On the main part that I guess is not Northern Ireland. I don't know. And it starts when, it basically takes place in this small farming village, and the main character is a farmer and his family, and he notices a bunch of, birds that are acting kind of weird, and, he just attributes it to a cold snap, and then he, occasionally he gets pecked by a bird, he hears a tapping on his window, birds fly into the door, into the windows, and eventually, it just escalates further and further, and like the BBC declares a national emergency. They're cut off to supplies, like grocery supplies and all these other things. They're trapped inside their houses, and eventually everything just kind of ends. There's radio silence. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how many people have survived, and the main character guy just kind of decides to go outside, smokes his last cigarette as if to face the firing squad, and goes outside to face the birds because, like, the rest of his family has died.
Interesting.
So it's kind of similar, a similar situation, where the story feels very apocalyptic.
I mean, that's fitting, though, because the movie is very apocalyptic.
It is, but it's fascinating because the short story just makes a point of it right off the bat. It's like, a small farmer, oh, there's birds. And in the movie, it's like, after the opening titles, it's such an ancillary concept, like, there's a wide shot of some birds flying over the city, which is normal in San Francisco because they're so close to the ocean. And then they go into the bird shop and they're talking about birds. There's birds in there, and, they start freaking out, whatever. Understandable, because they're pet birds, so they make a lot of noise in a pet shop, It's not until she gets struck by the gull as she's, boating back from his place that you're like, huh, that was weird. Was that intentional? Why would a gull dive bomb, especially when she made the trek all the way out there? Fine. It's just when she was coming back to the mainland. And that's when, you kind of start getting pulled away from the love story and more into, so what is actually going on with these birds? It's a really interesting turn in the story, and it's also a really famous shot, obviously, because a lot of that stuff where she's, in the boat is filmed in front of like sodium vapor lights to kind of keep the, what they called fringing, because at the time they would use like blue screens and green screens, but it was really bad with fringing around the edge, and with birds especially flapping, they didn't want all the fringing to take place around their wings, so they would film it in front of these yellow sodium vapor screens, and that basically eliminated that. It's a very complicated process. I'm not going to go into it because it's a whole like multi-projection process just to get the fucking thing on film, and it's a lot of work. Aside from that, it's just really fascinating how both of the original stories are very kind of apocalyptic, and then in their adaptations, it was like, I'd like to focus on romance, and the other one was like, I want to focus on da 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 boom.
It's funny though, because you say they focus on romance, and like there is a romance. That romance almost feels like a bait and switch to me, because it's introduced in the beginning. It's very clear that they have an attraction to each other, and there's that sort of like antagonistic flirting that they do where, he's like, I saw you in court, and she's like, oh yeah, and then he's like, yeah, I like when people get in trouble for when they break the law and they go to jail, you criminal, and they're like flirting. But once the birds attack, that's gone. And I think if this movie were made by like anybody else, especially in that era, it would have ended with like the hero rescuing the girl and pulling her in, and her like sort of fainting against his arms, and the music would swell romantically, and he would kiss her, and like none of that shit happens. She does get saved, but it's like she just kind of gets dragged out of the room. She's catatonic. She's not there anymore processing anything, and he's just sort of trying to walk her to the car so that they can drive away. They don't get a romantic embrace. They don't really get like a kiss or anything. There's no swell of music. It's just like, oh, fuck it. None of that matters anymore. What matters now is we have to survive or we're going to be killed by these things. And I think that's so interesting. And he did the same thing like in Psycho, like there's like groundwork laid for romances that don't ever happen. They like the darkness of the plot sort of overtakes them. And it's not that they're pointless, they just don't resolve the way that typical Hollywood movies do, and I think that's neat.
What's also really interesting, you talked about this idea that the love story is almost kind of like it's almost like a bait and switch. I was doing, a little bit of research, and there's actually an interpretation. Well, it's a monograph that was written by Camille Paglia. Yes, Paglia. So she wrote a monograph specifically talking about the birds and how it is meant to be, the birds are meant to be interpreted as the many facets of female sexuality and, by extension, nature. And what's really interesting, and I didn't even think about it until, actually reading about this, that the fact that other than Mitch, every other main character in the story is a woman. And Mitch, his character, is specifically affected. The crux of his character is based on his relationship with his mom, his sister, and his ex-lover, which is Annie, the school teacher. Mm-hmm. And all of those things are thrown off balance by the introduction of Melanie, another woman. I think that's a really interesting interpretation, a really interesting take on. There's also some themes of entrapment, basically how people are confined to their homes and how quickly, this idea of, civilization becomes a trap, and how quickly it can turn on us, that kind of stuff. Anyway.
It's funny that you bring that up, though, especially about the many facets of female sexuality. I did not really clock that most of the vast majority of the main characters are women. Did not clock that. Something that I did notice, though, and when you talked about it, it reminded me, whenever Melanie meets Annie, it takes a long time before Annie reveals that she knows Mitch because she was in a relationship with him previously. And she says something to the effect of the mom broke them up because she didn't like her for reasons. I'm assuming mother-in-law reasons.
Yeah, mother-in-law.
But for a huge chunk of that time before she finally said, "Oh, I dated Mitch," I thought she was flirting with Melanie, and I thought like really heavily the two of them had like palpable chemistry, and I was like, are they supposed to be into each other? Because I'm getting heavy lesbian vibes from both of them. And
you know, I always felt that way too, even watching it as a kid. Which is funny. Even watching it as a kid, I remember thinking, are those two like into each other? Do they kind of want to be more than friends? It's the vibe I'm getting. You know, it's not the first time it's happened. You know, when we watched Frankenstein, you have that fantastic scene with Dr. Frankenstein and Face. I can't remember. Van Helsing. Is that his name? Van Helsing. No. Van Helsing. He plays Van Helsing in Dracula. Same guy plays Dr. Fuckface in Frankenstein. Whatever.
That's it. It's Fuckface.
Yes.
German, you know.
Yes, it is. Yes.
That's actually Fuchface.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that same scene, you know, that chemistry, how he has like no chemistry with his wife or anything. Mm-hmm. But then in that scene, there's fantastic chemistry. It's not exactly the same in The Birds because, you know, she has really good chemistry with Mitch. I always thought
she does,
you know, and especially in that first scene, it's really bubbly.
But that's what I know. That's how I noticed it, is because her interactions with Mitch, like you can tell they're flirting. It's very obvious that they're into each other, and like it's enjoyable. It's an enjoyable sort of back and forth, teasing each other, flirting. It's because of that though that when she talks to Annie, it feels like the exact same scene playing out. Like they're doing the exact same demeanors. And I was like, man, they're flirting, right? they're into each other.
I have a suspicion it's because when Mitch and Melanie are talking, Melanie is one of those people, you can tell on her face, at least the way she's characterized, she's constantly thinking and calculating. What am I going to say next? What am I going to do next? And I feel like that in that same scene, that is the kind of woman that Mitch is attracted to, because in that same scene when Annie and Melanie are together, that's what they're doing to each other. They're basically calculating back and forth. How much do I want to reveal to this person? How much do they need to know? And so it kind of, there's a lot of tension that feels, you know, that's kind of like a sexual tension, but there's also like this tension, this give and take, this cat and mouse game of like, how far am I willing to, you know, reveal all the information, you know, that kind of stuff.
That's true.
Which is also, really interesting. So you have like two women that kind of have a chemistry, but they also have like an almost standoffish relationship with each other, you know, at the very beginning, because they're like, I don't know how much I can trust this person.
But again, that's true of Melanie and Mitch too. Like, they have a very standoffish relationship because he's holding back that she's pretending to be a fucking bird employee, like bird shop employee, even though she's not, and he's definitely holding back that he knows her. He's trying to pretend like he doesn't realize that she works there, and so they do that same thing. You can
see the change in her character as soon as she finds out that he's a lawyer and he actually like helped do some of her prosecution stuff. You can see it like change from playful flirting to fuck, I'm also still going to flirt, but now it's angry flirting, you know. It's like
yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, she's very pissed at him, but that doesn't stop her from being like, you know, I'm gonna buy those lovebirds and deliver them to her.
Yep.
Wink. Meanwhile, in Maximum Overdrive, when the two characters, like the moment when Brett says to Bill, hey, you're pretty cute, I was like, I guess they're a couple now. Like, they don't have any chemistry. They've barely said anything to each other, but sure. And then, oh my God, the line that she delivers after they've had sex, when she like rolls over to him and says, you sure make love like a hero. And I was like, so bad. Woof.
That's funny. Oh, although it does kind of sound like a Stephen King line, you know, it sounds like something that would be in one of his books.
He's not good at romance, at least not in his early books. I remember reading Lisey's Story and Bag of Bones and liking the romance in both of those a lot, especially Lisey's Story. Lisey's Story feels like really genuine, but like Salem's Lot, woof, it's so bad. So I was doing some research into life on the set of both of these movies, and both of them had really terrible working conditions. For Maximum Overdrive, I'll start with first because it's bad, but doesn't feel as bad in some ways. Like you can chalk it up to Stephen King just being an amateur because he had never directed a movie before. he just kind of was like, no, I'll do it because no one else will. So they were like, I read an interview with Yardley Smith where she was talking about stunts on set. Like, they didn't have stunt people, at least not a lot of stunt people, at least. They were doing a lot of their own stunts at times that were extremely dangerous. She, I believe there was a truck that was supposed to, like, race at her. Oh, I think it was when the car drove into the restaurant.
Yep.
Yeah, and she like managed to dash out of the way, but it was like just in time because it came way too fast. And a lot of things like that where the stunts on set were done by, this seems cool, okay, go do that. And I think Yardley Smith even mentioned that, like, they weren't getting like paid hazard pay or anything. It was just sort of like, she didn't know any better.
Well, she did mention in the interview that I watched that, she was like, that was probably some genuine fear on the screen, because when that car came through the wall, it was way faster than it was supposed to be. And I was like, what are y'all doing?
And I know that, so the stunt at the end when I think it's the ice cream truck that flips upside down, it was supposed to go end over end. The way they were going to do the stunt and make the ice cream truck flip was they had this wooden post sort of built into it, and they were supposed to hit it, and then it would cause the forward momentum to make the truck flip. But it didn't hit correctly, and it didn't flip like they expected it to. It hit, flipped upside down, and then that was it. And the way it hit the post, it caused splinters from the wood to sort of just shrapnel out. And it actually cost the director of, I think it was the director of photography, his eye. Like, he got shot in the eye with these wooden splinters, and it, like, literally cost him vision in his eye. He ended up suing Stephen King for the injury, which, fair, you know?
Yeah.
And then King settled outside of court, which, again, you know, fair. That was sloppy of all of them. Like, obviously, King is to blame. You also should probably blame the producers for, like, not having someone on set to, like, provide more oversight, to be like, hey, let's not do that. You know?
Well, it was basically, you know, the film was designed to be like, how can we make this as low budget as possible so we can get lots of explosions and, you know, trucks and stuff. So everything was like, we'll film it in Wilmington, North Carolina. There's not a big film community there. It's like just a bunch of regular townspeople that are helping. You know, some of them have no film experience, some of them do, you know, that they bring in. You know, it's a lot of, like, King's a first-time director. De Laurentiis only, you know, had done a few films, you know, so he was pretty big, but, you know, it wasn't like an established movie-making studio like Paramount or something,
right?
You know. And so, yeah, I think you kind of get, even when, like, they talked about filming the explosion at the end, and how it was basically just one take because they filled up the set that they built, and they were like, all right, blow it up. And they filled it with way too much C4. And so when they blew it, the C4 went first, and talked about how you could, like, feel it in counties over because it was just so huge. And then once that's, because it's usually like a multi-stage thing, like a C4 to actually bring down the structure. And then you use something like TNT or whatever the other thing is to make big flames and smoke so that it's theatrical.
Yeah.
And so you can see on film where it's a 2-part thing, and it's, and they talked about filming it, and they were like behind this plexiglass thing, and they were like, it's great. And then, like, flaming shrapnel starts raining down on top of them, not very far from them. And they're like, it's fine, you know, like, but it could not be fine real fast. You learn that, you know, from, like, what is it, the Twilight Zone movie? During, what's his name's part, because it was the same attitude. John Landis, it's very the same attitude, like, bigger is better, big, blow it up. And then, you know, that causes the helicopter to flip sideways and people get decapitated. So so it can go south really fast with that same attitude. So it's actually a really lucky thing that never happened on this set. It kind of makes you wonder how many movies have been made like that, where people were just like, oh, fucking just, and people very narrowly escaped death. You know?
Yeah.
Just for the glory of being like, I was in that movie. Like Evil Dead or Maximum, you know, just all of those movies with like shoestring budgets, people punching each other in the woods, just like.
Well, those movies are usually like low budget, and they keep the scale of the story small because of it. Like, nobody's necessarily going to get super hurt from Goodnight Mommy. It's a very small budget, and it's easy to do like practical effects for the torture stuff that like no one's going to get hurt. They don't have to have a stunt person doing necessarily that much stuff. Like, the biggest, scariest thing is the fire at the end, and most of that can be handled.
Yeah, and then there's that part where she actually like runs outside and falls.
Right, but most of that can be handled pretty easily. It's not like they're blowing up truck stops and flipping trucks, which is kind of crazy for a low budget movie to be doing stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, they're honestly lucky that it was just one person who lost an eye instead of someone dying.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Birds movie set was a nightmare for a multitude of reasons. So Alfred Hitchcock is known for being a brilliant filmmaker and a piece of shit person. Kind of similar to Stanley Kubrick. They come from sort of the same stock of director of, I like when my performances are real, so I'm just going to make your life hell, and that will show up on screen. Because that's what Kubrick did to Shelley Duvall in The Shining, and that's very well known. That's what The Exorcist. I'm trying to remember who directed The Exorcist.
Yeah. Yeah, William Friedkin is the director. William Peter Blatty is the...
Peter Blatty, right. So anyway, William Friedkin was the same thing. Like, he was a douchebag to his actors on set and terrorized them. And Hitchcock, did the same. The one that's the most well-known, the sort of famous, terrible moment is when Tippi Hedren's character goes up into the attic and she gets assaulted by birds. What was supposed to happen was that they were going to use mechanical birds to, attack her, and it would be, safe because they're mechanical birds. Instead, the mechanical birds, for whatever reason, I don't know if they weren't working or if they just didn't look convincing on film when it came time to do it. But Tippi, in an interview I read with Tippi Hedren, she said that one of the producers or production assistants or someone came into her trailer and they like, she could tell they had bad news to deliver because they were doing that sort of sheepish, like, dancing around, and then they finally were just blurted out, the mechanical birds aren't working, so we're going to use real words, and then they just bolted from her room. So when she showed up on set, what she had to do was basically, they shot that scene for 5 days, and it was just 5 days of Alfred Hitchcock throwing birds at her, live birds. I mean, the scene with the kids was also really harrowing because those kids were being chased by birds a lot.
Yes, but, also, those kids, all of that, for whatever fucking reason, because Hitchcock hated location shots. So that whole scene where all those kids are, like, running down the hill, from the birds, is again, one of those shots that's filmed in front of one of those sodium vapor projectors, because they shot on location a camera guy going down the hill backwards, and they just made all the kids get on a giant treadmill, projected that in the background, and they were like, and go, and threw birds at them. And like, when they would fall, which you have to fall, when birds, the other kids would just accidentally like step on and trample the other kids, and It was kind of a nightmare. So
yeah, Tippi Hedren, so she endured 5 days of having live birds thrown at her. At one point, I believe Cary Grant visited the set and described her as the bravest person he'd ever met because she was enduring this psychological trauma for a week. The last day of filming, she had to wear the special version of her outfit that they made that had holes in it, and she had elastic bands wrapped around her underneath her clothes, and they attached string to those elastic bands and tied them to live birds' feet so that they were attached to her as they flew around. And one of them pecked her in the face, and it pierced her eyelid and like almost pierced her eye. And that's when she was like, I'm done. I'm good. Bye. And she left. And Hitchcock thankfully was like, well, I think we've got everything we need. And, he also, though, and this is the somehow worse part, was just a fucking grosso, like a sex pest. You can tell he has a type because all of his movies star like the same type of blonde woman, like the 60s version of a Fox News host.
Yeah.
And he was known to get obsessed with his leading actresses. it was very clear that when he was casting these women, it wasn't just that they were beautiful, he was like into them. But Tippi Hedren specifically, as far as I know at least, this is the only case I have seen where I saw like it reported, but he sexually assaulted her on set, both on The Birds and also in the next movie that he made, which was Marnie, with Tippi Hedren as the main character, Marnie. Several times from what I read, there were times in his office, there were times in the car where he was like trying to force himself on her, and one of the last time that she saw him was like at the end of filming Marnie. He tried to force himself on her and she told him no, and she started to leave, and he told her essentially like if you leave, you'll never work in this town again. He said, I think actually his words were something to the effect of, I'll ruin your career. And her response was, do what you have to do. And then she left. And he did. She didn't get hired for like 3 years after that. She didn't get any work. And even then, her work was like pretty sparse because she was under contract from him and he wouldn't hire her because she turned him down and he's a petulant man baby. I didn't know this at all. So I was looking up, there's the movie Hitchcock that came out in 2012 with Anthony Hopkins. Is based on a book, and I was going to buy the book. And so I was looking into the book, and while someone was talking about the movie Hitchcock, they also mentioned that same year, another movie came out, also about Hitchcock, called The Woman. And that's because that's what Tippi Hedren, that's what Hitchcock would call her after she turned him down, and he basically blacklisted her. He wouldn't even say her name. He would just say, that woman. That movie was made with, I don't remember his name. He's been in a shit ton of stuff. Little short British actor. Kind of has a very bug-eyed look to him. Toby something. He played Hitchcock in that movie. Oh. And I when I read The Woman, what it was about, I was like, wait, what? What's it about? And that's when I learned. I started looking it up, and Tippi Hedren has been very open about this. She still ends her interviews saying that he was a genius and she has a great amount of respect for his work and what he did. And she kind of chalks it like her acting career up as it wasn't something she was interested in continuing anyway, because she went on to like start an animal preservation and like help endangered species and stuff. And she says that she found more value in that work, but it also praising his movies still feels very much like this guy is a cultural totem that sort of changed the movie industry, and so it's difficult to be like, no, he's a piece of shit and I hated him, so fuck him. You guys are bad for watching this movie. So, but it's a real tarnished legacy with him. He's very gross.
Yeah, there's like a long string of actresses who have had very rocky relationships with Alfred Hitchcock, like Vera Miles, like Janet Leigh, like Tippi Hedren, like probably Grace Kelly. If I were to do more research into it, I'm sure there's some horrible things between those two as well. So,
I mean, it's also just probably a safe assumption. Like if he's done it to one, he's probably done it to the others. Especially since, like I said, I haven't read of any moments like with Tippi Hedren in the sense that it was like an explicit like
assault,
an explicit moment of sexual assault, several moments of sexual assault. He's just always been sort of a creep and a grosso and had inappropriate relationships, like inappropriate boundaries with the actresses. But that was the specific instance I've found of like Hitchcock did a real bad, like just capital B bad. So it's one of those things where it's like, movies are great. And then you're like, man, too bad about that director.
Right.
Okay, I think that about does it. If you want to join the discussion and share your own thoughts with us, hit us up online. We're on Twitter at Eerie_Earfuls. Our email is eerie.earfuls@gmail.com, and our website is eerieearfuls.com.
You can subscribe to us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many other places. If you like the show, please spread the word, and if you're feeling extra generous, we'd love if you left us a review.
Our theme music is Baba Yaga by Kevin MacLeod. Our synopsis music is Anxiety and Night of Chaos, also both by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under a Creative Commons 4.0 license. Find more music at incompetech.com. Thank you for listening, and stay scared, everyone. Okay, I think that about does it. If you want to join the okay, I think... Fuck. Okay. Okay, I think that about does it. Fuck, god damn. How is it the outro? I did great in the summary, and in the outro, I'm flubbing.
Okay, I think does it.
Okay, I think that about does it.
I get it, Sandy. I get it.
No more squirrel jokes.